Hello, my name is Natalie May, Development and Special Events Officer at French Heritage Society. I am pleased to introduce the sixth and final installment of this Innovation in Action virtual event series. Throughout the spring, we've been meeting dynamic chateau owners from all over France who are devising new, creative ways to raise awareness and support for the restoration work. It's been my pleasure to curate this series, as I was one of the many to discover and be inspired by such stories throughout the pandemic. Today we'll hear from Amy and Marc de Dineschamps of Château Rosières en Vivarais, located in the Ardèche, which they purchased in 2016. The fortified medieval property dates from at least the 14th century and boasts a dominant position over sweeping hilled landscapes. With varied backgrounds in agriculture, enology, archaeology, etc., Amy and Marc bring their broad skill set to bear as they restore period detail to the chateau, sensitively convert historic outbuildings into studio space for future yoga retreats, and clear vast tracts of once cultivated land to revive vineyard activities. All this done with a commitment to environmental sustainability. The couple documents this remarkable journey via Instagram at Château Rosières and their popular YouTube channel, The Chronicles of Rosières. Now I'll hand it over to Jennifer Herline, Executive Director of French Heritage Society.
Thank you, Natalie. On behalf of all of us at French Heritage Society, I say a special bonjour to our members who have joined us today and a warm bienvenue to those of you who are new to our programming. For those who may not be familiar, French Heritage Society's mission over the past 39 years is awarding preservation grants to culturally and historically significant French architecture in France and the United States. The series helps put a spotlight on chateau owners who are dedicated to restoring their properties using innovative tactics. An equally important part of French Heritage Society's mission is ensuring that the skills required to work on preservation projects are transferred to the next generation. Through our advanced internship program, each year we select and send around 35 students from prestigious universities in France and the United States across the Atlantic for internships. Lastly, I would like to thank the French Heritage Society team for their work on this program. Natalie May, who you just heard from, thoughtfully curated the series, and Ben Wells is making sure we have a smooth experience together. Please note that we will welcome you all to join us on screen after our conversation. You are welcome to ask Amy and Marc questions directly or by using the Q&A button along the bottom of your screen throughout the program. And now I welcome Amy and Marc, thank them for being here with us. And before we start our conversation, I invite you all to join us on a virtual visit to Château Rosières. Well, that was a very fun introduction to Chateau Rosières, I have to say, bravo. And as we begin this program, I always like to begin by asking you, how did you come to find Chateau Rosières? How many places did you look at before you knew this was the one? What was the process?
We were actually living in the Caribbean on a small volcanic island where we'd met by chance about a year earlier, I think in 2013. Marc was growing lettuce and I was on holiday. And we were married the next year, and we started living there in a tiny wooden house in the jungle, and running this lettuce farm. And for various reasons, we decided we wanted to make sure that we had somewhere in France to come, well, somewhere in Europe to come back to. And we thought you get a bit more for your money in France, and also Mark's family are far less willing to travel than mine are. And so we started looking around, and we didn't really know what we were looking for. We didn't know if we were looking for a little cottage to retreat to in a few years' time, or a project where we could both kind of explore our interests, because obviously when we were in Montserrat, it was only Mark, or what really. And so we just started looking at places we found a bit cool on the internet. And we got taken in hand by an estate agent who took us around about 15 places in total. But she said from the start she knew which one we'd end up with, and she was absolutely right. And she persuaded us to come here. And yeah, it was just right. We knew. And I think what we both saw was the potential for both of our interests. So Mark was interested in farming and the landscape and everything, and I could see all the outbuildings being put to use as something like a retreat centre, or something I could get my teeth into.
Actually, I think we were more attracted by the estate than by the chateau.
Yeah.
The chateau had really a lot of charm, but it's quite dark. It's a medieval fortress, and it had been quite damaged by very insensitive renovations in the 70s. But it had a very homely feel. But we would probably, if we had had a choice, we would probably have chosen to move another house to this estate.
Yeah, we actually saw other buildings we liked better, but the big problem in France is that people, well, in fact everywhere, people tended to sell off the estates that belonged to their buildings of interest. And because it was hard to run, and nobody wanted, as people got normal jobs, they didn't want to be estate managers. And so everywhere we went to see, whether big or small, had a tiny little garden, was right on the edge of civilization, and we didn't really want that. And so this really, the estate, the landscape, I mean, every day you look out the window and you see the Alps in one direction, the Cevennes in the other, there's mountains everywhere. It's just beautiful. It's just wonderful.
And in regards to restoration, and I think Ben's going to pull up a slideshow here that you can walk us through. But when you purchased the chateau, how much restoration work were you anticipating versus what the reality ended up being?
We knew there would be a lot of restorations, but what we liked about it is that it had been lived in, and it was still possible to live in it. So even though we had massive renovations to make the outbuildings habitable and the chateau itself to our taste, it was possible to live and reasonably comfortable to live in.
So if you can see here, the ground floor and the first floor are in actually reasonable condition, but the top floor hasn't been lived in since, well, they had one servant living there at the beginning of the 20th century, but even then that was the only person probably for a couple of 100 years. And I think if there's another couple of slides, you'll start to see from above how many outbuildings there are, which are nearly all derelict.
How many bedrooms are in the chateau? Just out of curiosity.
Bedrooms on this floor, probably about 8, I think, 8 or 9.
Okay.
And then the top floor were 5 or 6. What's really strange here is that everybody who comes is astonished by how big it is. I don't know what it is about the photos that make it look a bit kind of small, but everyone comes up the driveway and just goes like this, and they don't have any sense of quite how massive it is. And you can see behind on this photo, there's a whole barn complex and a tower at the back, which is actually another house. In the distance, there's another house hidden in the trees. There's a chapel.
And another
house at the front. So it's a bit like a small village, really, or a medium-sized village.
And what was the first project that you undertook restoration-wise?
We had legally to put up to date the sewage system. And this was a bit tricky because with our plan, we wanted to do it not only for the house, but also for all the other buildings. And so we had to think about a plan on how to do it, because that was really a massive project, and we're actually not completely done with it.
Yeah.
So we are doing it bit by bit, but it involved a lot of trenches through the garden. And often we realized that we were hitting the bedrock that was actually really shallow, so it made it a lot more difficult to dig.
Yeah.
And yeah, we had it was quite a steep learning curve. And also, with while we were digging trenches, we had to undertake some other projects, because we had to think of all the pipes we could pull through these trenches, so that we wouldn't have to reopen them and break a pipe and repair it and refill it and etc. So we had to do a master plan of what we wanted to achieve, and then start doing a little bit of everything.
And in fact, when we talk about the actual renovations later, we can show you they're sort of at the end. But in this photo, you can see the house at the front is one of the ones that advanced the most from being most derelict, and has come the longest. We're closest to finishing. Actually, it's quite exciting, that one.
This really gives an overview of the property as well, I think, and how it's situated there right next to. It's beautiful.
Thank you.
One of the other big jobs we undertook was the installation of a massive wood chip heater. That we'll come back to it later.
A little bit later. Yep.
We did it because the trenches were open, so we had to do a whole system of hot water pipes. And
yeah.
So that yeah, that's another big thing we undertook at the same time.
Yeah.
Great. And Ben, next slide.
These are just general ones. I mean, if you want, whilst we're looking through these, because there's a limit to these ones, we can tell you about the history.
Yeah, that'd be wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah. So as Natalie mentioned, the Château is dates back at least from the 14th century, but it's very likely that it was there was something earlier, because actually the very first record we have is a will dated 1301 that mentions the Château de Rosières. So we know that at the very beginning of the 14th century there was already a château. It's quite likely, actually, that it's the place had been occupied for a lot longer, because we have remains of gold platforms. So that back in our woods, that might be over 2,000 years old. So it's we don't really know what was there before, but it's likely that it has been occupied for over 2,000 years.
And we've got a few documents, such as this one, which show us, which is from, when's this one?
So this one is the will of the owner of the Lord of Rosières, dated 1477, that we found completely by chance at an auction. So we had no archives when we arrived, but we managed to find bits and pieces, and so now we have we got a reasonable idea of what happened. So we have very little record of what happened in the 14th century. It's quite likely that the original castle was demolished during the 100 Years' War. And then it was probably rebuilt more or less as it is in the late 15th century. So it was, at the time, it was the Burin family who were, they were originally called Bury. They're thought to be of English origin, so it could be a British family that settled in Ardèche after the 100 Years' War. It went through the same family until the 17th century, when it went by marriage to the Reboulets. So there were at the time they probably undertook some embellishments and did some nice terraced gardens. because it was after the wars of religion. And so the political climate was a bit more safe and settled, and so they turned it into from a defensive fortress to an agricultural estate.
And what you can see, if we stay on this photo, this is from the early 20th century, but it shows quite well. If you see the corner that's looking at it, you see some filled-in windows and a big thing at the top, where there's a cannon emplacement from the inside. And this was originally a potentially detached tower, and there were other buildings all around the side that we can see from the Napoleonic map. It's a big, when you start looking closely, it's not actually a homogeneous block. It's lots of different buildings that were defensive, purely defensive, because it was such a violent area. And then gradually, as the wars fell away, it became more about status. And so they wanted somewhere more comfortable. They opened up windows and closed others and stopped things being about how to shoot people and moved it into being more comfortable.
After the Reboulet family, it went. There were some.
Then could you just go back to the last one, because this one needs a bit of explanation. Sorry.
Yeah. So the family, the Reboulet family, who ended in the early 18th century, it was a family that was believed to have to get their fortune from the wars of religion. There are a few dodgy stories about them because there are several assassinations within the family. And so eventually it went by a will to a cousin of theirs who was from the Romanet de l'Étrange family, and it stayed in that family until the French Revolution. And at the time it belonged to Louis Charles César de l'Étrange, who became a general of the First Republic. So he was on the side of the revolution. At the time he didn't live in the chateau. He was more involved in politics, and so the chateau fell in disrepair, and he sold it during the revolution in 1790 to the Lavalette family, who owned it until the 1969.
And we've met the last ones who lived here, which is really nice, and they were able to tell us all sorts of things about the place. And there was only one of them who did major renovations. It
was mostly in the late 19th century, in around 1880. And they did some embellishments for the time that you can see at the bottom of this picture. There's a window that looks like a Gothic window. That's it's a door actually, and a little window at the front, just at the corner of the house. And this was the neo-Gothic fashion of the time. So it was Viollet-le-Duc, the one who restored Notre Dame. So it was basically they reused old stones to make it look more ornate and more like what they imagined a castle would have been in the Middle Ages.
And what you get is the room that we're in now is directly above that one, and this room, that room, and I think there's another one are very 19th century. We call it the modern part of the chateau. And but the other parts of it are very 18th century, and then some bits of it are actually really still very medieval, with vaulted medieval ceilings. And it's been I studied archaeology 20 years ago, and it's been really interesting to start to peel back those layers and understand it. And we've lived in it for several years now, and we're still coming to grips with it. And what's been really, really interesting has been we had 3 weeks of a team of 13 students from Lyon University here recently doing a survey of it. And that's the next slide that wouldn't make any sense otherwise if you see it. We've been doing all sorts of work like 3D reconstructions of the chateau using laser. So it's very, very precise, which means that we're going to be able to work out building phases much more easily. And you can see from that, it's the chateau without the roof on, and you can see things very dramatic and clear. For example, the two towers, which from the back don't look totally dissimilar, are actually completely different shape and size from each other, and so would have had different functions. So it's quite interesting. Their work is they're just writing it up now, but we really like to support local historical societies and archaeologists and let them get to grips with the place.
And education too.
Yeah,
actually, I was teaching at university in a past life before I did that, so I still kept a taste for teaching and sharing that.
And for the next 2 years, we have an archaeology student attached to us writing his master's from Lyon University as well, which is quite nice.
Oh, it's fabulous.
And I think the next photos, we can just give you a very quick idea of the estate evolution.
Yes, so these are aerial pictures of the evolution of the estate through the 20th century. So in 1948, which is the earliest aerial picture we have, we see it was a real agricultural estate with a lot of terraces, fields with various crops, meadows. You can even see vineyards if you look closely, on orchards. So it must have been a very varied landscape at the time. Sadly, in the 60s, there was a massive exodus in France from the countrysides to the cities, and so it became really hard to find people to work the land, and also they had subsidies for planting trees, and so they just bulldozed the whole estate and planted Douglas fir, which you can see on the 1979 picture. So this really damaged the estate, because what you can see on the aerial picture is that we're on quite a steep mountain.
We're in the middle of it, and it goes up and down either side.
And all the fields you can see are actually terraces with dry stone walls, and a lot of work involved in that. And when they planted the Douglas fir, they just bulldozed through the walls, and it really damaged everything.
Yeah.
Then in 1999 there was a big storm and most of the trees fell down, and so in the early 2000s there was a blank cut on all the estates, and they were supposed to replant, but they didn't. And so when we arrived in 2016, the whole estate was basically growing back in brambles and bushes. And so one of the first big jobs we had on the estate was to actually reopen paths just to be able to access it.
We're going to carried away. So that's kind of bringing you up to where we are now and the situation. I think the final slide in that section shows you 2011, which is very similar to where we are now. And you can see in that, just sort of in the lower quarter, you can see the chateau. And then our land goes from that bottom road right up to the top.
Through the road, nearly all the way up
nearly all the way to the top and nearly all the way to the side. So it's a 130-acre estate.
Oh my goodness!
And I think our next section was to talk to you a bit about our approach to reconstructing the 18th century estate. And I just wanted to show you. I think there's a short drone video where Mark can tell you. Exactly, so you just show you a little bit. It shows you better than the aerial photographs that are coming up next. If Ben could, okay. There we go.
So you can see that it's not as flat as it looks on the aerial photo. And actually, we are on a ridge of a mountain, so that's why the growing agriculture was extremely difficult in the medieval times, because you had really steep slopes and there were no trees, so they had to grow their food uh, wherever they could. And so when a lot of work went through the removing the stones from the land and building dry stone walls in order to increase the surface of arable land. That's we are trying to go to strip back the land to find these walls and find where it was actually used in the past.
So showing you this was really to show you the kind of nature of the terrain. Behind the house is where most of the terraces were that were growing agriculture and various crops and grazing animals and vines. And further down is much steeper and the soil is much thinner and less fertile. And so it was more forest until you get right down to the bottom. So and we've still got trees at the top. A forest commercial plantation. So that's kind of what we arrived to, which was centuries of productive estate decimated and then left after a commercial cut to just grow back in brambles. Which sort of brings us on to why we're so passionate about the estate and how we want to reconstruct it. And this partly goes into one of Mark's many degrees in agriculture. Actually, could you come back to just us so Mark can show you something in person rather than slideshow? I don't know if that's possible. Because he has an interesting book to show you. Which is essentially, there was this treaty from, when was the date of it?
1602. So it was the Théâtre d'Agriculture et Ménage des Champs by Olivier de Serres, who was an agronomist from Ardèche. So that's what the treaty looks like.
It's that big. Mark reads it for fun.
Yeah, it's actually it's about 900 pages in that edition. And what's really interesting is that Olivier de Serres was the father of agronomy in France. And he was from Ardèche, just a bit south of here. He took most of his inspiration from the Roman agronomists, because the Roman agronomists also managed their estates in villas, which were basically farms, and they managed it in a way that they would produce everything they needed on the estate. In his treaty, the Théâtre d'Agriculture et Ménage des Champs, he describes every aspect of how an estate should be run. And what's really interesting is that most of the chateaux in Ardèche that were managed around that time took inspiration from this treaty. So he, for instance, that's our next point. He makes a big deal of water management because in Ardèche we had very dry summers, and water is one of the most precious goods we have. And actually, it's probably the reason why the chateau was built where it is. It's because we have at least 7 or 8 springs on our land, which is otherwise really dry. We found a lot of hydraulic works that were more or less derelict and in the forest. Some of them, the previous owners didn't even know they existed.
I think there were some
and so we have have photos of
I thought so, of the water system.
Yeah. But just to go back a second before we talk in detail about the water system, one of the just where we extrapolated from the Roman agronomist and Olivier de Serres, we've based our philosophy on how we move forward on that. We feel that a lot of historic estates tend to be stuck treating ancient estates and buildings with modern perspectives, and so they are focused on raising money simply to run it. You know, huge electricity bills, huge water bills, huge everything. We're sort of facing everything from a domestic modern house on a grand scale. And so what we wanted to do was take it back and go, okay, they didn't have access to government funding back in the day. They either survived or they didn't. And so rather than focusing on how we could raise not enough money to run the place, we're focusing on how we can make the place pay for itself. Obviously, it's not possible completely, and we need help to start up. But our idea is that we're going to try and run it like it was advised by Olivier Gisser and the Romans, even, to make it self-sufficient and to make it as much as we can, and also to make it productive so that we can even earn money from it, but using modern technology, because we don't have lots of unpaid labor, thankfully.
Yeah, that's the main difference between then and now. At the time, there would have been at least 50 farmers in the neighboring farms. The estate was actually bigger than it is now, and there would have been at least 20 or 30 farms attached to it. So that's how they would manage big surfaces. So now, since we don't have that, we need to be clever and use what modern technology can bring us. So we have one of the first things we invested in was an excavator,
massive digger.
So that we could do all our trench work ourselves and all the leveling, lifting stones.
Yeah. So one of the, obviously we're going to look at all of the, and it's also sustainability is really important at the moment. We're trying to get in the whole world, trying to become more aware of our environment. And one of the key things here is water, as Mark was saying. So you can tell them about these water slides.
Yeah, this is an example of one spring that had been abandoned by the previous owners because they switched to the mains water that's pumped from the Rhône, which is 20 kilometers from here, and lifted all the way up here. So if we go through the next slides, we have some more of these, and we actually found a lot of them in the estate. A lot of them because they were marked. Some of them were marked on the Napoleonic map of 1836, and so I just went in the brambles and looked where they were supposed to be. And actually, I found that there were still remains of it. So it was really interesting to have the archaeology students here because they came with their professors. And the professors said that a spring that was just lying in the middle of the forest, completely derelict, might have been medieval.
Yeah, by the architecture around it. But our big challenge is, on a 130-acre estate, you've got these springs spread all around. How do you get the water to where it needs to be? And this has been Mark's major project. We're actually just starting to show a YouTube series on this now because it's been going on for so long. But Mark's been looking at where the abandoned cisterns are, often 19th century or earlier, and then trying to work out if there are existing pipes going between them all. It's hundreds of feet between each one. It's quite a massive project. I think the next photo might be of the cistern that we've just renovated.
Yeah, the Olivier Gisser's point was to find where the water was, build the house right in the middle of the estate, and direct all the water towards the house so that you could use it for drinking and for watering the gardens and have your own crops. So we found the cistern on the picture on the right was there but had been abandoned in the 60s. So we did a lot of trench work to pipe it back to the medieval from the medieval spring. The well on the left was there, but it had been covered by a cast iron plate, and it was just buried under the driveway. So we have repiped all of these and taken the water to one central point in in one of the buildings, which we see
on the next
yeah.
picture. Yeah. And so it's so much more it sounds really easy when you say it, but
so yeah, on the picture on the left you can see all the pipes coming from all the springs and being redirected towards all the buildings and the garden. And we put a picture of the what it looks like closed, because I think it sums up our philosophy in the renovations we undertake. We used a reclaimed door with the 18th century hinges, and we just put it in front of the cupboard where all the modern things are hidden.
So you can close the modern out of it back afterwards.
That's it. So we wanted to look like it would have looked in the 17th century, and well, we wanted to look sympathetic to what it should be, but still have the function of modern technology.
And in this same room, I think you'll see on the next photo. Oh no, yeah, the next photo is our massive wood chip heating system, which is another major achievement of this year. Now, we actually converted a barn. The door at the back there is the front of a huge wood chip silo. The cylinder on the right is the water heater, which is 3 meters tall, and it's hard to sort of get across the scale of it. This wood chip heater will heat all of our buildings, including a big hall, cafe, several houses, and
the future greenhouse.
And a future tropical greenhouse for Mark. And it was the biggest domestic installation that this company had done in the whole of France. But we're able to do it because we have 130 acres of forest. So the next photos hopefully will show you some of the forestry work going on. We brought in, because there are some remaining commercial forests that we're managing. So we get a company who come in, and by selling some of the wood, we pay for the wood pay for the work that's done on it, and we still have wood remaining to chip for our heating system. So although the heating system itself was a big outlay, over the years, we hope to become neutral in how much we won't be paying any money for heating, which is massive for our ambitions to run a retreat centre. It also is a highly, highly efficient way of running heating, because the boiler, I mean, it uses every bit of the tree, doesn't it?
Yeah. We just take the offcuts of commercial forestry, and conveniently our neighbor has an industrial chipper, and because Ardèche is the most forested department in France, so we can source our wood very locally, and there are all the tools for that.
And what we don't do just blanket cuts. We do, as you can see here, they're going around trees. So they're doing the normal thinning work, which allows other trees to go bigger. And it's just a constantly regenerating forest and well-managed forest. And I think the final...
And we also do it, we are trying to eradicate the remnants of the commercial forest. So we try to promote diversity in the trees. When we do the cuts, so whenever there's a rare tree, we leave it so that it can seed and regenerate the forest, having in mind the biodiversity.
And you can see an example. I think this was a video actually, so I don't think it's working so well, but you can see on the next slide, I think, the results of one of that cut that we did there, which I find amazing actually.
And I know you have some farming ambitions, if I'm not mistaken, which I think are very interesting.
So yeah, as we are regaining our land, we are trying to clear some old terraces back to being agricultural. And actually, what we find is that the generations, the centuries of work that went into it means that there's We have beautiful soil with hardly any stones.
Mm.
And once we dig the stumps of the trees, we have perfect terrain for growing vines. So
And
that's
all cellar.
so that's our wine cellar. We actually found some labels that show that it's been used as a wine cellar since the 19th century, at least. And so our one of our new projects that we started this year is to plant vineyards. We found some evidence that there were vineyards on this side of the valley, probably on our land, since the 9th century. Because at the time the village was owned by an abbé, Saint Bernard de Romans, and luckily the archives went through the centuries, so we know exactly that there were vineyards here. So I have absolutely no doubt that we are on a terroir for growing wine.
And one of Mark's parts of his agricultural degree was oenology, and so he has some knowledge of it, and his family are involved in wine production, and he's also quite a perfectionist and very interested in looking deeply into a subject. So I have total confidence that we're going to produce some jolly nice wine here. And we've also been experimenting, because one of the nice things here is that we're not restricted. We're not in an appellation that restricts what grapes you can use. And so we've been,
well, actually we could be, but we chose not to, because we want to make the most of our land. And so we thought we would innovate as well by using grape varieties that are suited to the climate. And it involves, actually we used, we looked for varieties that like mountain,
like the Alps,
mountain soil. So we went to look for grapes from northern Italy
and Greece,
and Greece as well, the mountains of Greece. And so we did a little experimental plantation of different grapes 2 years ago, and we are trying to select the ones that will do the best in our climate.
And I think the next photo, you can see an example of the terraces. They're actually the ones at the front of the house, which we won't be growing vines on, but we're using them currently to experiment with growing wheat and vegetables. That's one of the terraces, and there's another one lower and another one above. But it just shows you the kind of what the terraces would have been like before and what we're trying to return them to. And we'd like to grow wine, but we'd also like to become reasonably self-sufficient in vegetables for our retreat and for us. And our particular passion is rare breed animals. And we started
and
out
vegetables.
With, and vegetables. Oh, Mark has been planting the craziest vegetables. But we've got a reasonable amount of birds so far, quite a lot of chickens, turkey, peacocks, pigeons, all sorts of things who sort of run our lives really. But we're interested in moving on to getting rare breed sheep, cows, pigs, not just because they're hilarious, but also because they provide an attraction when people come here on a yoga retreat. They can work with the they can help work on the farm. I think it's very healing to work with the animals. And also things like pigs are vital for turning over soil in the forest, and sheep. Already we have a shepherd who keeps the sheep on our land and moves them around and clears the undergrowth. They do a really good job. We just won't be getting goats though, because they eat all the trees, don't they?
No.
We should get goats. So that's kind of a overview of how we're approaching the estate, which you can tell probably you're quite passionate about. But we do also have to pay some attention to the building itself, so we can have people here. And I think then the last photo of that section was our first vineyard. I don't know if we missed that one. But otherwise we can move on. It's not that important.
Yeah, we should probably move on to the restoration.
And the restoration, we just wanted to give you a quick idea of most of the people who you will have heard speak have Château either much further down the line in their renovations or in a better condition to begin with, and often much more recent. And we have the opportunity to really start and think it through now. And we're really, really passionate about making sure we don't just force our own ideas onto the place. We're allowing it to tell us what we want to do, what to do with it. I mean, obviously it has to be viable, and we would like more than one bathroom for everybody, because it gets a bit busy to share one. But we are being really careful. It's challenging but exciting to try and peel back the layers of the chateau, because as you heard at the beginning, with all the different time periods when they did major renovations, that you can walk from one room to another and move from century to century.
Right.
And even within one room. So this one here in particular, I think, shows it really well. This is a massive fireplace. Well, it wasn't even that massive when we moved in. This is the first stage. We actually haven't got a photo from before, but there was a modern inset right up to those windows there, with a very modern fireplace in the middle of it, plasterboards. And we didn't know what we wanted to do. When we go into each bit of renovation, we don't go into it with an absolute set plan, because we first want to find out what's behind the nasty 70s stuff.
Right.
So it's one, or even more recent. So we took down the first bit, and then we were just planning to renovate this part. But when we got to this part, we realised that there was this stonework, well, this plasterwork had fake stone sprayed on it. And we thought, that's a bit weird and not very nice. Shall we? And we kind of goaded each other. We were being filmed for the TV at this point. Actually, no, they'd gone by this point. So Mark, as is his wont, started smashing holes, as you can see on the top right there, in the wall to see what was behind it. I frequently find him digging holes in the house. And when we saw it, we realised that there were nice old stones in there. And as we demolished it, which is also a favourite pastime of both of us, we realised it was the old central fireplace of the chateau, and it's beautiful. And so if you see, that whole section was about half the size it in there. And back in those times, people would have actually used that almost as a separate room. They put curtains across and sit inside of the fire. Now, in the 19th century, the whole floor in that area was lowered. And so what you'll see, I hope, on maybe the next slide, is that means that the bedrock of the house, and that's part of the way through, the bedrock actually flows up into that wall. And so we're sitting on cut out bedrock rather than an actual stone floor. And you can see that there's the old fireplace there that had been filled in. This was medieval. And so we started to get quite excited at this point, didn't we? And just kept going. I think the next one, probably.
So we sandblasted all of that. Sadly, it had been a bit damaged over, because they had installed a brick chimney in the early 20th century, probably to make to put a stove. And but after we sandblasted it, we found the original volume of the fireplace that we see on the next slide, I think.
You just go through the next one. That's the finished product, but it kind of shows you what you can't see is how enormous it is at the top, or even how deeper it is. But what you can see is a little crescent on the right. That was an old bread oven we found, and it proved one of our most challenging decisions, because the bread oven had been then slightly cut in half by a wall, probably even in the 18th century, that had been put there, or the 19th century, and we didn't know how much of it to reveal and how much not. And so we went in the end for just revealing that little corner of it. That didn't mean we had to demolish an entire wall, and we put spotlights and made a feature of it. So we're able to say this is part of the old medieval bread oven. I'm aware we're sort of running out of time, so I thought maybe we could shift on to the next bit, just to show you, give you a rough idea of. So this is the tower house that you probably saw at the beginning, at the back of the house.
Right.
Yeah. So this on the left, it was the condition it was in when we arrived, and all the walls had been plastered with the cement, which was quite horrible to remove. The floor had collapsed because the roof hadn't been renovated. And behind the plaster, we found a beautiful wall with the old carved stones, a narrow loop that had been partly blocked to do a little cupboard. And at the top, above, in a walled space, there were some pigeonholes. So it was an old pigeon tower with defensive features at the bottom.
And this is what it looks like now on the right. So we're not showing you a before and after. We're showing you a before and
during.
during. And
no, the interesting bit about that tower is that it might be one of the only remnants of the original castle. We think it might have been built before the actual castle, possibly in the 13th century or even before.
And that's going to be one of our places for accommodation for our retreat centre, as is this. And we promised you right at the beginning we'd tell you about this house that's in front of the chateau, and it was actually the coach house. And we only worked that out because we started finding lots of ironmongery things, horseshoes and carts. And in fact, the old entrance to the chateau is lower down and is on a level with that. And that was in use in the 18th century. And so it's possible that this house wasn't used properly for the last couple of 100 years. And this is the state it was in when we started working on it. The floor or ceiling, the bit in the middle, had completely collapsed. You couldn't walk on it. And these are the few days we worked with these roofers to put the floor in. I think you'll see on the next one. This is my favorite bit of this renovation. I love it.
So for these renovations, we used the Douglas fir from our land. So we did the cut and took them to the sawmill in the next village and back.
Get cut.
So it was actually these logs only drove a few miles.
Yeah. And then on the next one, you can see them being winched into place because they're huge. It doesn't really come across there.
Yeah, so that's the empty space.
That's the same photo. It's not a wide angle. It's you can see it as it progresses through, as they're putting the beams in. And we decided to keep the beams with their bark on them, so they look quite rustic inside.
Basically, we did it. We just did an identical renovation. The rotten beams that were here before also were around very roughly cut, and so we thought it would be a good idea to redo it as it was.
But we've kept loads of features in here, and this is the one that's nearest to being ready. I think the last picture is the kind of the downstairs as it is now, and oh no, that's still another one. I really like pictures of this one, and but this is part of it as it is now, and in the back corner there was a forge that we found, and we could tell that because all the burnt metal and things around it. And so we had to take it down to do some work, but we had it rebuilt afterwards. And on the top floor, it was where the coach hands would have slept and lived. And we've incorporated into the two huge bedrooms there. And we've incorporated their sort of living quarters into that, little features, like a little cupboard, a stone sink and things. So we always want to, we're not precious about preserving everything that's older than 10 years old just because it's old. We don't think that everybody did everything right before, or even that we are not allowed as a new generation to put our stamp onto it. At the same time, we really hate what was done to the place in the 70s, which was to just indiscriminately rip everything out, concrete it over and make it modern. And we love the history of it, and we love to let it speak, and that's really what we're trying to aim for in our renovations of it. And we've shown you some pretty massive projects, but we are doing this on a small basis, bit by bit by bit, everywhere ourselves. So we believe very strongly in using local artisans, and so we have people who are mason and roofers are people who know the traditions, they know the way things are done here, and they reconstruct stuff so well. But everything else we try to do ourselves. We do all the demolition ourselves. We're kind of demolition experts now. That's when we say demolition, we don't mean like smashing down buildings, but chipping walls, getting rid of the cement, getting rid of concrete slabs, undoing the 1970s effectively.
I think what you have such an extraordinary vision for this work, and your backgrounds, your expertise, and your interests are just so beautifully aligned for this property. I don't know what the real estate agent told you. She thought that this would be what the reason would be that this is what you would pick, but as we went through this, I was just blown away by how much of you personally is brought into this. It's incredible, really remarkable. Well, thank you, Amy and Mark, and thank you to everyone who has joined us today and who has joined us for the past 5 programs that have been part of the series. Natalie did such an extraordinary job curating this, and every conversation has been both fascinating and hopeful, I think, in what it represents for restoration in France and making sure that these extraordinary properties with these incredible histories are there for us to visit in the future. So thank you, Amy and Mark, for your dedication to that.